We are continuing in the book of Hebrews. We're coming toward the end here, and as such, since Hebrews, as we said, it's unique from other New Testament books in that it's not so much a letter as a written sermon. And so just like a sermon or a lesson, we've had the observation and reflection parts of things. We've been told facts and then thoughts about them. Well, we're approaching the final application. What do we do with all of this? We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12, starting at verse 18 today, page 853 if you want to use the Bibles underneath the chairs. As before, the author of Hebrews has this habit of giving a warning followed by an encouragement. And so chapter 12, the first part that we looked at last week was really the warning, this need to be holy and endure in our Christian lives. Well, then chapter 12, the second part, is the offer of a better encounter with God. If we will live the lives as Christian disciples that we should live, then we will have a better, and I use that word encounter, and we're going to see why, with God than they had under the law. Things will be different, things will be better. And so for us, as we seek to, what's this going to mean for me? The offer for us is of a better relationship. A better life with God when we live His version of Christianity versus any alternative. If we don't live the way Jesus said to live, that God wants us to live, it's not saying that there's nothing there, but we're missing out on all that's possible. And as I thought about that today, I wondered, do we want that? Do we want more? Or have we settled for where we are? And, maybe where we are isn't bad, but wouldn't you want all of the relationship with God that you can have? Would you want to miss out on part of the relationship, the abundance, the fullness, the joy of the relationship with God? And so let's look at it in light of that. Hebrews chapter 12, starting at verse 18. It says, "For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages should be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, 'I tremble with fear.'" So what do you think that the author of Hebrews is talking about here in verse 18? What event in the history of Israel? Yeah, Moses getting the law at Mount Sinai, and the beginning of the Old Covenant. And you might think, well, that'd be a celebration, right? Here you have God's people, and they're receiving this special revelation from God of His will, His law. What a time of celebration. Well, it tells us it was just the opposite. I'm not sure what's going to happen up on my side of the screen here. So, Exodus 19. Verse 12 said, "You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, 'Take care not to go up to the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether beast or man, he shall not live.'" Verse 16 in Exodus chapter 19. So there we go. "On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder." And then Exodus chapter 20, "Now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off. And they said to Moses, 'You speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die.'" So that's the event that is being referred to here, and you can see how it wasn't a joyous occasion. It wasn't light and relaxed. It says in verse 21, "Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, 'I tremble with fear.' It's not recorded in Exodus 19 to 20 that Moses himself trembled, but it does talk about that in Deuteronomy 4 regarding the golden calf. And it seems like the author is putting those together, that's part of what was happening. And I thought about it. We might not expect that. The giving of the law, it was a blessing in the sense that it showed the best way to live, but it was also a curse because it showed God's requirement to live that way and his wrath due breaking it. And so there was that side, a double-edged sword, if you want to think. Also, the giving of the law emphasized God's holiness, which is often neglected. Definitely today and maybe even back then. If I were to give you the sentence, ask you to finish it, God is, what would you finish that? God is love. Of course we would. That's what everyone says. God is love. And for good reason, because the Bible says that. In 1 John 4, anyone who does not know God, because God is love. Right there. But you know what the Bible also says in Revelation chapter 4? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. So it's just a different order. Instead of God is holy, it's holy is God. As a matter of fact, it says holy, holy, holy is God. And that was their way of emphasizing something. It was to repeat it. And that's the only word repeated 3 times. Holy, holy, holy is God. There are 2 equal sides to God's nature. There is his love. That's his benevolent goodness, which in the presence of sin takes the form of grace. Grace, this favor bestowed when wrath is owed. And then there's the other side of God's ethical or moral nature. That's his ethical purity, his holiness. So love and holiness. Well, holiness in the presence of sin takes the form of wrath. God's holiness, by its very nature, in the presence of sin, takes the form of wrath. And so the giving of the law showed that purity of God, his separateness from sin, and it also showed his potential wrath, because if the people broke that law, that's what was due them. And it showed the power behind God, that he could back up his promises. It wasn't something to take lightly. If you broke the law of God, wrath was due you, and this God that was literally shaking the mountain, and fire was encompassing it. That's the power that this God has. So, answer the question, is God's holiness a good thing?
Yes.
Yes, God's holiness is a good thing, but it's also terrifying. How do we reconcile the two? One person used an illustration of the sun. Is the sun a good thing? Absolutely. Without it, we wouldn't have life. But what happens if you stand in its presence too long? You get burned, don't you? Yeah, people like me, it doesn't take very long at all. Others, they'll eventually get there. If you look at it, what happens? It will burn your eye. You'll lose your eyesight. And we're 93 million miles away from the sun. And it can do that. It's terrifying then to think of approaching near the sun. But the problem isn't the sun. It's not that the sun is bad. It's not the nature of the sun that's the issue. It's our nature. We can't handle it. Well, that's God's holiness. There's nothing wrong with God's holiness. It's just our nature when sin enters the picture that is the problem. And so Hebrews, the entire book, has been this comparison and contrast between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. You had these Jewish ethnicity Christians who had, again, become Christians, but were thinking about, considering going back to Judaism. And so the author is making this comparison and contrast, and over, the New Covenant and Jesus is better than anything under the Old Covenant. And so he just gave the Old Covenant. He said, it was a blazing fire and darkness and gloom. It was a terrifying sight that accompanied it. And even Moses said, I tremble with fear. That was the Old Covenant. Well, then look at verse 22. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Well, Mount Zion here is contrasted with Mount Sinai, and what's your initial impression of Mount Zion? Beautiful. Yeah, there's a great word. Yeah, it's something that attracts you. It's something that's appealing. You know, Mount Zion is another name for Jerusalem. And here it is the heavenly Jerusalem that's being talked about. And you have this other difference. In the Old Covenant, Mount Sinai, God came down. Well, here as believers, we go into God's presence. We're able to do that under the New Covenant. And where there are innumerable angels, it says, in festal gathering. That's the English Standard Translation. The NIV has joyful assembly, a time of excitement and revelry. Well, what do we call a time of excitement and revelry? A party, exactly. This is saying the New Covenant, it's a party. The Old Covenant, they were scared to death. Literally, if we touch the mountain, we will be put to death. And you notice they had to be put to death in some way that the person putting them to death couldn't touch them. That's what it was there. But now we have this party to look forward to. Verse 23, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. Enrolled, the NIV says the names are written. It's talking about the book of life, Revelation 3:5. Enrolled in heaven. The assembly of the firstborn, I think that refers to the inheritance status that a firstborn would have. Jesus was the ultimate firstborn heir, but it's saying that we are all firstborns in that sense. We receive the best inheritance. It might be a reference to the first believers under the new covenant, that we're going to be joining them. But we're all there in that special status of firstborn. We come into the presence of the spirits of the righteous made perfect. That's talking about the old covenant saints. And to God, the judge of all. Now, when you think about a judge, that can be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because the judge can declare you guilty or he can declare you innocent. Well, for the firstborn, for the righteous that believers are, it's good news to come into the presence of the judge. He will declare, he will make it absolutely official that we are innocent. And we come into the presence, verse 24, of Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. The author has detailed mediator and new covenant prior, how Jesus is superior, and now he just makes it clear. The new covenant that Jesus is the mediator of is clearly better than the old. And we come into the sprinkled blood, and in the Old Testament that was an image of inclusion in the covenant. You remember the priest would sprinkle the people with the blood, and that meant you're part of this. You're covered by this covenant. That speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. He throws in another Old Testament reference that they would be familiar with. Genesis chapter 4, verse 10, where it says, the Lord said to Cain, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood, Abel's blood, is crying to me from the ground. And you remember what had happened, that they had come to bring sacrifices, and Abel had brought of the best of his flock. And it said Cain brought some of the fruit of the fields. And scholars believe that the real reason his sacrifice was rejected is Cain brought kale. And God said, just no way.
Whatever.
Okay, that's not really in the commentaries, but just want to see if you're awake still. And if you like kale. Cain brought that, and God rejected it. Cain got upset and murdered his brother. He killed his brother. We don't know that he intended to kill him. I do remember one professor saying no one really knew what happened when you hit someone's head with a rock back then. But his brother was dead. And it says his brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. Well, what was Abel's blood crying out for? Vengeance, justice. Yeah, there should be justice done. But Jesus' blood speaks, and it speaks in a better way. Well, it's saying justice has been done. There's no longer any justice to mete out. I've taken care of it. I've covered it through his blood, through his sacrifice. Now, you look at these, and one thing to realize, it's the same holy God at each mountain. At Sinai and Zion, God's the same. He hasn't changed. What has changed?
Covenant.
The covenant has changed, and what has that has changed our standing before God. And not just the fact that there is a new covenant, but the fact that under the new covenant, as followers, as disciples, we are declared totally just, totally righteous. And so we can stand in the presence of God. Versus under the old covenant, again, that the law told them what to do, but they knew right away, we'll never be able to do that. And so we've talked about the fact that God, in God's forbearance, his patience, which is part of his love again, He didn't punish the sin. His wrath didn't come as it was deserved. But God is the same. It's our standing that's different. You go from you'll be killed if you even touch the mountain to let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace. What a difference. What a distinction.
Even the mediator has changed.
The mediator, there you go.
Jesus is standing between us and God instead of Moses.
Absolutely. You have Moses versus, and we've seen these. We see Moses, you see as it goes on, you have the high priest versus Jesus. He's superior in every way, and so we have a superior relationship with God because we know what's there. But it also brings a superior, transitions right into responsibility for us. And it talks about that in verse 25 and following. It says, see that you do not refuse him who is speaking. Who's speaking? Who was just speaking? Whose blood? Jesus, yeah. For if they did not escape, so they, talking about the Old Testament, Old Covenant Israelites, God's people, did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns us from heaven. At that time his voice shook the earth, talking about God, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken. That is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So, God warned them on earth, verse 25, again, see you not refuse him who is speaking, for if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven. So, talking about Sinai, God here on earth warning the people, here's what you must do, here's what will happen if you don't. Now he warns from heaven, so that's talking about the new covenant and the inspiration of the New Testament. It's coming from God, including this letter, and he says, much less will we escape. And here's just what I was talking about. If they were held responsible for what they knew about God and the relationship they had, how much more will we? Because we know so much more about God. We know about his Son. We know clearly about his grace and what enacted it, what made it possible. Our new covenant advantages are great privileges, but with that comes great responsibility too. Verse 26, at that time God's voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. So at that time, the Mount Sinai, the giving of the law, when there was a literal earthquake, shook the earth. But now he has promised, and the author here quotes from Haggai, chapter 2, where it says, for thus the Lord of hosts says, yet once more, in a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. Now what's interesting is that the author here of Hebrews reverses the order of heavens and earth, and he also adds once more and not only, to make his point. That it's going to be not just the earth as it was at Sinai. It's going to be the earth and the heavens. Everything. To get to the point, and he says in verse 27, this phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of things that are shaken, that is, things that have been made. So the created things that we see here on earth, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. So talking about the old creation versus the new creation. The old creation can be shaken. It will be shaken. It will be destroyed. 1 Peter 3 talks about this, where he says that the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. Everything that God has created, heavens, earth, stars, universes, galaxies, says it's all going to be done away with, and a new heavens and earth is going to be made. And this new heavens, the author of Hebrews says, it cannot be shaken. It's going to last forever. Verse 28, therefore let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. In this contrast, in the Old Covenant, they received a kingdom, a covenant. They were in a world that can and was shaken. We're going to receive one that can't be shaken. We haven't received it fully yet. We've got a taste of it. But we know it's coming. It's assured. And so it says be grateful. Be grateful that that's what we have to look forward to. And then what does that being grateful look like? It says, thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe. Now, I like the ESV in general, but here I don't, because that word worship literally means service. The New American Standard has service. What's the NIV have? I meant to check. What's it say? For verse 28, let us offer to God acceptable. It says worship in the NIV? Yeah. So we've talked about that before. There are two words that are translated worship in English, but they literally mean, the one means literally to fall on your face, to prostrate yourself, and then the other means service, to serve or sacrifice. And this is the word for sacrifice. So that's really what it is there. Let us offer to God acceptable service. And this is getting at the heart that Hebrews has emphasized over and over. Faith is more than just believing facts. Biblical faith is not, I believe there is a God. I believe Jesus died for my sin. I believe he rose from the dead. All those are absolutely essential to believe, but that's not faith. Faith is when you take that belief and you act on it. When you're faced with a situation, you're faced with a choice, a decision to act or not, to do or not, and you live out what you believe. What should I do in this situation? Well, if I didn't believe there was a God, I didn't believe Jesus died for sin, didn't believe there was sin, I'd act this way. But I believe there is a God. I believe that sin separated me from him. I believe Jesus died on the cross and paid for my sin and rose from the dead. I believe that I have been forgiven. Well, then I should act this way. And those should be two very, very different things in any situation with any moral implication. Maybe not when you're choosing chocolate versus vanilla or something on the lines of that. But anything that has moral implications. It should be a very different choice we make to live out what we believe. And that's what faith is. The author reminds them, he says to do that with reverence and awe, which is appropriate for a holy God. And then the author reminds them one last thing. And so you see, again, the warning, the encouragement, but he wants to make sure, like, okay, realize while I'm encouraging you here how serious it is. Our God is a consuming fire. What side of God is that talking about? If God is love and God is holiness, the fact that he's a consuming fire, which side does that fall under? What's that? Holiness, absolutely. Yeah. He's a consuming fire. You can burn up anything there is. That's talking about God's potential wrath. And so we have to always keep that balance in mind. God is love and God is holy. God's love in the presence of sin is grace. God's holiness in the presence of sin is wrath. If we're under God's grace, then we won't experience the wrath. But if we're not, then we will experience the wrath. The same God, it's not his nature that changes, it's us. Our standing before him. Any questions, any comments about that? All right, well then let's begin to break it down. What subjects did we cover today?
Love and fear.
Love and fear, definitely two. What's the other word that goes sort of contrasted with love? Holiness, yeah. God's love and holiness. That holiness in our human nature can definitely result in fear because of what holiness does to sin and our sinful nature. What else to talk about?
God is pure.
God is pure. Yeah, his ethical nature, his holiness, yeah. Yeah, this idea of shaking, that there's going to be a shaking, that we see now, everything, and think about it, what we see now is often what we focus on. It's all going away. It's all going to be gone. There'll be a new heavens and a new earth.
Old versus new.
God is faithful.
Old versus new. God is faithful.
And just.
And just. And that's God's justice is being true to both sides of his nature. So we talk about that. That's what justice really is. It's being true to his love and his holiness. And that's where he had to, and that's why Romans talks about prior to the cross, someone could make an accusation against God and say you're being unjust. Why? Well, because he wasn't punishing sin, even though sin hadn't been paid for. And so the cross made it clear that God is just, because now sin has been paid for, and that's where the punishment goes for anyone who has accepted God's grace. Well, let's boil these down then. I want to focus on 2 lessons today, and I forgot to put them on the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint's working, yeah, so great. The day I forget. So, 2 lessons. First of all, God's holiness exposes us, and we have a choice. So there's the first lesson. God's holiness exposes us. We have a choice. We can humble ourselves and realize that I need rescued. I need rescued from the penalty my sin deserves. And we'll have a joyous experience. That's what Mount Zion is. What a description of what's waiting for us. A party in heaven, thrown by the angels. Yeah, for sure. That's what a festal gathering. That's what he's talking about. That's what we have waiting for us when we're exposed by God's holiness, and we talked about his complete ethical purity, and we put ourselves up against that. Oh, wow. On my best day, I remember one scholar said, I wouldn't want to base my salvation on the best minute I've ever lived. Because the best minute of me compared to God's holiness, it can't compare. It can't stand up. And so, God's holiness exposes us. We have a choice. I can humble myself and realize I need rescued. I need God's grace. Or I can refuse to humble myself and hold on to what is exposed. I'm going to hold on to maybe some people just absolutely this sin. I am not going to let go. Or maybe some people hold on to their relative righteousness and they think it's good enough. Hey, look, I'm better than most. I'm going to hold on to that. Well, then you have the terrifying experience of Mount Sinai. Don't even touch this mountain. You'll be put to death. Again, we know God's holiness is the same in both situations, the party and the terrifying Mount Sinai. It's us that's different. And so what do we do? And the application then is just that. What have I done? Have I accepted God's grace as he offers it? Not just I believe there is a God. But have I accepted it? I believe Jesus was the Son of God, died for sins, rose from the dead, and he asked me if I want to follow him to be a true disciple. Take up my cross daily, lay down my life, take up my cross, and follow him. Now, if a Christian claims to want Zion, but lives like Sinai, that's a problem. I want my sins forgiven, but I still want to live holding on to some old things. So, first lesson, God's holiness exposes us. We have a choice. The second one, God will shake up the worldly things in our lives. God will shake up the worldly things in our lives. This earthquake metaphor is definitely appropriate. Think about it. We build our lives on, and then we fill our lives with a lot of flimsy things. Things that can't stand up. It doesn't mean they're bad things. They may be things like our spouse, our kids, our career, pleasures, any lesser version of Jesus or Christianity. Those aren't bad things, but they can't be the thing. They can't be the center. They can't be the foundation. How do we know if we're doing this? Well, what happens when these things are threatened or removed? Now, obviously, if something important to us, our spouse, our kids, sadness, grief, but what happens? How do we know if we're doing this? Well, God is going to, at times, come close and shake us up a little bit. We're going to threaten our security if we place our security in something other than him. And the prospect can be terrifying, but God does it for our good. We saw last week God's discipline. He does it to let us know. These things aren't bad, but don't base your life on them. Don't make them the center of your life, the foundation of your life. What do we do? What is God shaking in my life right now? And what is my response? He shakes things so we can see what we're really putting first, what we're really relying on. when he does that, how do I respond? Because he wants us to get to the point that he is first. He's foundational. All these other things are blessings from him, but they're blessings from God. They're not meant to take the place of God. You know, idolatry is when we put something else in the place of God. Any last thoughts, comments, questions today?
I always see the inability of man to stand before God on his own. And people complain, oh, why is this prophet, why did God send the prophets? You know, why are they special? Why didn't he just come and talk to all of us? You couldn't handle it. And it's so big and it's so powerful, and we brought him down to something so small that we think that we could handle it.
Right.
And we couldn't. You cannot stand in the presence of God.
Yeah. Yeah, you got this balance that God is love, absolutely, but God is holy. And yeah, if we've made God into something manageable and comfortable, that we're missing the point. There is this tension of a God. That's the fear of the Lord. He's a lion on a chain, and I'm outside of his reach because of the grace of God. But don't forget, he's still a lion on a chain. God's grace doesn't turn him into a kitty cat. It just means I'm not going to be mauled by him. And we have to keep those two in tension and in balance. And usually people go one way or the other. History goes one way or the other. You see this shift back and forth, you know, between a focus on God's holiness and, you know, sinners in the hand of an angry God. Well, yeah. And then you see, well, God is love. He wants you to be happy. The truth, as usual, is in the middle. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
And as a dwelling of wealth of why this, why that, why did this happen to you, why did that happen to them?
Yeah. Yeah, there's always that question of why. And that was a tough one to let go of. But we're going to see, I think we're going to look at Job a little bit soon. And God's whole point is, you can't understand. Not just you don't understand, you can't understand. Yeah. Linda.
Just kind of seems like there's a gap between where we're at and how we think we're being part of God, and not view the other one, the wrath, his true holiness. We prefer this side, but bridging that is what's important, is to understand both and appreciate both.
Yeah. And even God's holiness is a great thing. It's like the sun. God's holiness is a great thing. God's is still holy in that second part where there's a party going on in heaven. God's still holy. He doesn't like, okay, my holiness is now going away and I'm all love. No, he's still going to be 100% holy, 100% love. It's just we've changed. Our status has changed in the sense that we are totally forgiven. We are totally righteous. We're as righteous as God. We're as holy as God, if you want to use that word. And it's true. Absolutely sinless in the sense of our sin's been paid for. And in heaven, we won't be sinning. So the holiness isn't a bad thing. It can lead to a bad thing, the wrath. Any final thoughts, comments, questions? All right, we'll take that away from today. That, you know, any alternative to God and his plan is always going to be less. Basically, you got the choice of a party or touch the mountain and die. Which do we want? I don't know why it isn't as clear as it should be sometimes. God's way is always best. But it's not always easy. The author of Hebrews, who's telling these people that there's a party waiting, he's also told them and remind them, or acknowledge the fact, I know you're going through persecution. I know your life is difficult. Part of which just for being a Christian. So there's both sides of that.